Ice is one of the absolute worst types in the entire franchise, but have you ever wondered what the best ice type Pokemon is? I did, so I started working on this video, and what I found is that there are not that many good ice type Pokemon. I've done quite a few videos in this series, and I think this one was the most challenging in terms of finding enough Pokemon to put on the list, but after a lot of reviewing old results and digging through old tournaments, I think I finally have a list that I feel comfortable sharing with you. So let's start with number 10, Lapras. Lapras is a water and ice type Pokemon that most of you probably know. I mean, it's super iconic. Please keep in mind that this is not a list of how much I like these Pokemon, it's strictly how good were they in the official competitive format. Lapras was, at one point, kind of okay. Actually, at 2 points, kind of okay. Back during the first year of X and Y, Lapras actually got top 8 at the World Championships. Lapras was not a very popular Pokemon at the time, but there was a reason to use it. You see, Lapras gets access to the ice type move Freeze Dry, and Freeze Dry is really, really good. Freeze Dry is an ice type move that, instead of being resisted by water type Pokemon, instead does super effective damage against them. This is a big deal for a Pokemon like Lapras because back in 2014, water type Pokemon are very common. In fact, the combination of Politoed and Ludicolo was on a lot of teams that year, forming this kind of rain duo. Lapras is not only immune to water type moves because of its ability Water Absorb, it also heals from them if it gets hit by one, and it can threaten water type Pokemon back with Freeze Dry, which could even KO Ludicolo in a single hit. When this Lapras wasn't facing off against a water type Pokemon, it could still be kind of scary because this Lapras used the move Sheer Cold, which is a one-hit KO move that only works 30% of the time. If my memory is correct about this specific Lapras, it hit quite a few Sheer Colds and ultimately ended up making it all the way to the final 8 players in the World Championships. If this were everything that Lapras had done, I probably wouldn't have put it on this list, but Lapras actually was really good during the beginning of Sword and Shield. You see, Lapras is one of the few Pokemon that was given a unique Gigantamax form. Dynamax was the central mechanic of Sword and Shield, and the way that it worked is that it would double your Pokemon's HP stat and change all of their regular moves into special max moves, which were mostly stronger and had a special secondary effect. Gigantamax Pokemon were given a special unique G-Max move that replaced their normal Dynamax move. In Lapras's case, if it used an Ice type move in its G-Max form, it would use G-Max Resonance, which was an incredibly broken max move. G-Max Resonance would not only do Ice type damage, but it would also set up an effect called Aurora Veil. Aurora Veil is one of the most broken moves in the game, or it would be if it wasn't so hard to actually get going. The way that Aurora Veil works is that it reduces all incoming damage on your side of the field by a pretty big margin for the next 5 turns, except if you hold a specific item called the Light Clay, it reduces that damage for 8 turns, which is often the majority of a competitive battle. The problem with Aurora Veil is that number 1, very few Pokemon learn it, and number 2, you can only set it up if the snow or hail weather condition is active, which is a really hard activation condition because there just aren't that many Pokemon that can set up the snow or the hail. Hail was changed to snow at Scarlet and Violet, so hail pre-Scarlet and Violet, snow post Scarlet and Violet. Anyway, Lapras was really good because it didn't need the hail to be set up to actually set up the Aurora Veil, and so you could do stuff like using Lapras to set up the Aurora Veil and having a really bulky team around it, or you could give Lapras the weakness policy, attack it with one of your own Pokemon, and then not only be doing huge amounts of damage, but also be incredibly tanky because of the Aurora Veil. Lapras is mostly good at the beginning of Sword and Shield, and it didn't like have that much longevity, but it was good enough that I think it warrants a space on this list. Also, there just aren't that many good Ice type Pokemon, so the bar is a little lower this time. Speaking of low bars, let's talk about our number 9 slot, Vanillux. This is in fact a Pokemon. It is pretty forgettable because it's pretty bad, to be honest, but there were times where Vanillux was used a little bit. Vanillux is a pure ice type Pokemon that is one of the few Pokemon in the game that can set up the hail with its ability Snow Warning. That's really the main reason to use Vanillux. Its stats are pretty mediocre to be nice, and its move pool sucks to be kind. Despite Vanillux not being considered very good, it did actually win a regional alongside Haunter. That is not a joke. Haunter literally won a regional, and it was mostly used when there weren't alternative hail setters. The thing about hail or snow is that it makes the move Blizzard 100% accurate, and Blizzard is a really, really good attack because it's not only very strong, but it also has a chance to freeze. Freeze is the most powerful status condition in the game. If you can inflict a Pokemon with freeze, you're basically chilling, and Blizzard hitting both opponents' Pokemon and having a chance to freeze either or both is a really big deal. Vanillux pretty much only ever used the Choice Scarf item or the Focus Sash item, Choice Scarf being the main one, and was pretty much just a Pokemon that you would use to kind of get some fast ice type damage on your team. You could use it against dragon type Pokemon or grass type Pokemon. Ice is a really good offensive type. The reason why it's one of the worst types in the game is because defensively it's just abysmal, but for a fast and frail offensive Pokemon, like, you can kind of afford to be not that good defensively because your typing is, yeah, not so good anyway. Vanillix is pretty much only used at the beginning of Sword and Shield and Sun and Moon when there just weren't really better alternatives for an offensive hail setter. It might pop up again in the future, but it's not very good, so I kind of hope that it doesn't. Okay, coming in at number 8 is a more iconic ice type Pokemon, Weavile. Weavile is an ice and dark type, which, like many ice types, is very fast and very frail, but it can hit pretty hard. Weavile will mostly use the Focus Sash item to help keep it alive, and it was never very common, but it's had a decent amount of usage over the years. It's actually won 3 different regionals over the years. Most recently, Weavile actually won the Players Cup Invitational, which is a special invitational online tournament that popped up when real life events were canceled. And it's a Pokemon where, although it's never been super common, it does have a niche just by being a fast, dark, and ice type Pokemon, or I should say, it had a niche until recently, but we'll get to that later. The thing about Weavile is that although it's mostly used as an offensive Pokemon, it does have some utility as well. It can use the move Fake Out, which is just an incredible supporting move that can stop a Pokemon from moving for a single turn. I remember it was used a little bit with like Mega Rayquaza and Primal Groudon back in 2016 as like a 3-piece combo where Weavile could use Fake Out and then other offensive moves, or I don't remember if it had Feint or Taunt. It gets some other useful supporting moves as well that can be useful when supporting really powerful Pokemon. Weavile also doesn't need to support. It can also just go on the offensive using ice and dark type moves to do big damage. It's a really cool Pokemon. It's a bit difficult to use because it's really frail, and if it ever goes up against a Pokemon that, I don't know, resists ice and dark and maybe has Intimidate, then it might struggle a bit, but yeah, like, I do think it's a pretty cool Pokemon, and it's had enough success over the years that I think that it deserves to be on this list. Okay, number 7 is our first ice type Pokemon that I would say is good. It's also a new addition. I think that if it had been around for longer, I would have put it higher up, but it's only been out for a little bit over a year, so I'm including it here in the number 7 slot. It's Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur is an ice and dragon type Pokemon that is Scarlet and Violet's pseudo legendary Pokemon. Baxcalibur won the very first regional of Scarlet and Violet in the US and also won the first international level tournament as well. It also followed that up by getting second place at the following international championship. Baxcalibur is one of the strongest Pokemon to come out of Scarlet and Violet for a number of reasons. I think the most obvious one is that it has really good stats. Its worst stats are, like, I would say middling, like they're not even that bad, and it hits really hard and is very bulky as well. It also has a great ability that not only prevents it from being burnt, but also gives it an attack boost if it's ever hit with a fire type move. And it gets a unique signature move, which is really good. Glaive Rush does a ton of damage and never misses. And the reason that it's allowed to be this strong is because it has a pretty big drawback. Until the next time Baxcalibur moves, it will take double damage. The thing is, though, that it's actually easy to get Baxcalibur to move again, because even using a move like Protect, which moves before most other moves and shields Baxcalibur from all damage, that cancels out the effect. So you can just Glaive Rush and then Protect, and it's like nothing ever happened. You can also use a priority move like Ice Shard, which not only does a little damage, but also moves before most other moves to cancel out the effect as well. Like many Ice-type Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet, Baxcalibur benefits a lot from Terastallization. The thing about Ice, like I mentioned, is it's so good offensively, but really bad defensively, and when you Terastallize, you keep your offensive benefits, but you also get new defensive relationships. And so it's actually a Pokemon that benefits a lot from Terastallization. Terra Poison is the Terra type that I think of most often on Baxcalibur because it would allow it to flip its relationship against Fluttermane on its head, where before Moonblast would do super effective damage, as a poison type you actually resist it. It's a cool Pokemon. I think that if it had been out for longer I would have put it higher up, but because it's only been out for like a little over a year, and most recently it's been struggling quite a bit ever since, well, pretty much ever since Incineroar came back, I thought that 7 was a fair placement for it. By the way, if you're enjoying the content, please make sure to check and see if you are subscribed. Helps the channel out a lot, helps me out a lot, and also will help you get more videos from me in the future if that's something that you're interested in. I know some people find these sub plugs annoying, but currently only about 25% of our audience is actually subscribed, and so I feel like I should say something because there's a lot of people watching who just aren't subscribed. If you like this video, I'm pretty confident you'll like some of the other stuff I do, so yeah, I would recommend it. Coming in at number 6 is another iconic ice type Pokemon. This one is Abomasnow. Abomasnow is the classic hail setter. Just like Vanillix, it has the ability Snow Warning, which sets up the snow or hail weather condition whenever it switches in, and for a while it was the only Pokemon with this ability in the game. Abomasnow is an ice and grass type Pokemon, which in my opinion is one of the single worst type combinations in the game. The reason it's so bad is that you have a ton of weaknesses, like these two types don't really cover each other at all. You don't get that many resistances, and you struggle offensively. Abomasnow having a quadruple weakness to fire as well as being weak to many other common types is just not a very good look. It also is kind of tough because neither ice or grass can hit opposing steel or fire type Pokemon, which is just rough. The thing is though, Abomasnow actually won 3 different national national championships back in 2010. You see, back then, Groudon and Kyogre were some of the top Pokemon in the game, and Abomasnow actually matched up really well against them. It could turn off their weather with its own weather, and because it was slower than them, you could actually lead Abomasnow and immediately gain control of the weather over Groudon or Kyogre. It resisted both of their main attacking moves, with Groudon using ground type moves and Kyogre using water type moves, and it could hit them both for super effective damage with its grass type moves, and it could also use Blizzard against Groudon as well. Abomasnow was actually used a little bit in 2013 as well. Being able to hit Landorus and Thundurus for super effective damage was a really big deal, and so Abomasnow actually got second at 2 different national championships in 2013 and placed top 4 at the World Championships that year. The thing is though, that was over a decade ago, and since then, like, although Abomasnow has seen a little usage, it's never really been common or good in my opinion. Abomasnow is a really unfortunate speed stat where like you kind of want it to be in Trick Room, but it's also not strong enough to really justify it as like a main Trick Room attacker, and it's also not so fast that you can even give it a Choice Scarf and have it be all that fast. So it kind of just has a tough time across the board. Abomasnow definitely has some major issues, but it did see a little play earlier this year when Hail was changed to Snow. This is basically just a 50% increase to its defensive stat. Plus with Terrestrialization, Abomasnow could change its type and so not have its terrible defensive typing. That being said, it didn't really see a ton of success, though some players did experiment with it, and I think it was popular in Japan, at least for a little bit. So I think that there's hope for Abomasnow in the future if the conditions are just right. Our number 5 slot goes to a Pokemon that has not been out anywhere near as long as Abomasnow. It's one of the future Paradox Pokemon, Iron Bundle. Like Lapras, Iron Bundle is an ice and water type Pokemon, but unlike Lapras, Iron Bundle is extremely fast. In fact, it's the fastest Pokemon to be added in Scarlet and Violet, and it can even go even faster if you give it the Booster Energy item, which raises its speed by 50%. Iron Bundle had a phenomenal first year. Despite only being legal for about a year, Iron Bundle had a phenomenal performance. The thing about Iron Bundle that makes it so good is that it is a really good Pokemon at controlling the speed of the battle while still being able to exert some offensive pressure. As an ice type, Iron Bundle can use Icy Wind, which will hit both opponents and lower their speed by 1, allowing you to combo with another Pokemon. Icy Wind is very valuable as a speed control move because although it's not very strong, being able to do a little bit of chip damage can play a pretty big role, especially when you consider Pokemon holding items like the Focus Sash or that have the ability Sturdy, which prevent them from getting knocked out in a single hit. And with the Booster Energy item, Iron Bundle is so fast it can even outspeed other Pokemon in Tailwind. Iron Bundle won 5 different regional level events in its first season and placed top 4 or better at pretty much every event it was legal for, at least until they added some of the more powerful Pokemon back into the game. I think what's really neat about Iron Bundle is that it walks the line between an offensive Pokemon and a support Pokemon pretty well. You see, just like Lapras, Iron Bundle also gets the move Freeze Dry, and Freeze Dry has really nice synergy with Hydro Pump. When you have both Freeze Dry and Hydro Pump or any water type move, there's no single type in the game that can resist them both, because the only types that resist water are Water, Grass, and Dragon, all of which Freeze Dry does super effective damage against. Hydro Pump is an inaccurate move, and so when I used Iron Bundle, I didn't like using Hydro Pump, so instead I used the move Encore to lean more into the supporting capabilities rather than the offensive ones. If Iron Bundle had managed to continue its dominant streak once more powerful Pokemon were added into the game, I think I would have put it higher, but despite the fact that it's not doing so well anymore, I still think it had such an incredible first season that it deserves to be this high up on the list. Okay, we're into the top 4 now. Our number 4 slot goes to a Pokemon that up until last World Championships was the only ice type to ever win the World Championships, and that's Mamoswine. I feel like Mamoswine is another classic ice type Pokemon. Mamoswine actually is really interesting typing because it's also a ground type Pokemon. Ice and ground have really nice offensive synergy, which means Mamoswine's really threatening against a ton of different Pokemon. Normally you could use a grass or a flying type to deal with a ground type, but those are both weak to ice, and ice type Pokemon don't like dealing with fire or steel types, both of which are weak to ground. Mamoswine won the World Championships back in 2013 with the Choice Scarf item because it was one of the few Pokemon that matched up well against both Landorus Therian and Thundurus Incarnate, who were kind of running the show back then. It was definitely more of a niche pick, like it wasn't a Pokemon on pretty much anybody's radars, but it ended up winning the entire tournament because it was so well positioned. It also saw a little bit of play the following year when the power level was lower just because there were less Pokemon around. And there's actually a really funny Mamoswine that managed to win a regional championship back in, I believe, 2012. It didn't have any EV training on it, like the player just thought that it was EV'd and it wasn't, and so yeah, it won the whole tournament, which is pretty funny. As a ground and ice type Pokemon, Mamoswine really excels offensively, though it has decent bulk, so it's not like it will go down to a single hit unless it's a powerful, super effective one. Mamoswine will typically hold a Choice Scarf to boost its speed or a Focus Sash to increase its survivability, though we have seen a little bit of play with other items as well. The thing about Mamoswine is that it's also in kind of this awkward speed tier where it's just not quite fast enough, and also power creep hasn't been super kind to it, and it wasn't even that good of a Pokemon to begin with. So really the main reason it's up here is because it had success in the early years. That being being said, Mamoswine did receive a pretty major buff in, I think, Sword and Shield, or maybe it was Scarlet and Violet, where they changed the way one of its abilities works, where now the Oblivious ability, which previously was pretty worthless, it now also blocks Intimidate, which is a pretty big deal because Intimidate is very, very good. It didn't cause Mamoswine to have a major resurgence or anything, but I do think that in the future, Mamoswine could potentially pop up here or there now that it has a better ability. It's worth noting that Mamoswine also has the ability Thick Fat, which is good. It reduces the damage from fire and ice type moves, but Thick Fat wasn't enough to take Mamoswine kind of over the lip of being a really strong Pokemon. Normally at this point in the video, I would do honorable mentions, but I'm not going to do honorable mentions this video because the ice type Pokemon that aren't on this list are like really not even worth mentioning. Okay, fine. I'll honorable mention Articuno because it won a tournament earlier this year. I actually made a video on it. It's really interesting. Articuno used to be like one of the worst legendary Pokemon of all time, and then it came out of nowhere and won a tournament earlier this season. It's a really interesting story and kind of shows the success of both terrestrialization and the change from hail to snow. So if you're interested, you should check out that video. I'm not going to talk about any other ice types though, because they're really bad. But our number 3 slot is not really bad. In fact, I'd say it's the first Pokemon on this list that I feel confident saying is good. It's Alolan Ninetales. It's an ice and fairy type Pokemon that also has the ability Snow Warning, setting up the hail or the snow. Alolan Ninetales' stats aren't great on paper. It is fast, but it doesn't hit super hard, and it's also like not that bulky. Or it's not that bulky at first. See, Alolan Ninetales is the best Aurora Veil setter in the game. It not only sets the snow up so it can actually use the move, but it's faster than most other Pokemon, meaning that it can actually set it up before you take big damage. And that's a big part of the reason why in 2017, when Alolan Ninetales was first released with Sun and Moon, it did really well. Alolan Ninetales won an international championship and placed second at the World Championships in 2017. Alolan Ninetales was one of the top Pokemon throughout that first year of Sun and Moon back in 2017 because it was just so hard to deal with Aurora Veil when the power level was lower. 8 turns of reduced damage for your entire team is just really, really strong, and so it's no surprise that Alolan Ninetales kind of took off. It has struggled a bit since then with more powerful Pokemon coming back into play, especially other weather setters. Keep in mind, you do have to have the snow/hail weather condition be up in order to have Aurora Veil work. So if your opponent has a different weather setter, they can actually just keep it in the back and switch it in whenever Alolan Ninetales tries to set up Aurora Veil, basically causing the move to fail. That being said, Alolan Ninetales did win a regional earlier this year, like I mentioned, when paired with Articuno as kind of this blizzard spammer. I mentioned that Alolan Ninetales isn't super strong, and that is true, but it also isn't that big a deal because the moves that Alolan Ninetales tends to use have a lot of value outside of just raw damage. Using Blizzard over and over again, like I mentioned, is a great chance to freeze. It can also use Icy Wind to support its team, or Moonblast for not only damage, but also to potentially get special attack drops. It can also use moves like Encore and Hypnosis and Helping Hand to support its teammates. But most of the time, Alolan Ninetales, if it gets Aurora Veil set up and then maybe gets one attack off, I would consider it to have done its job. That's how valuable Aurora Veil is. It's kind of worth sacrificing one of your Pokemon just to get up. Like all Ice-type Pokemon, Alolan Ninetales benefited a lot from the changes in Scarlet and Violet, especially the change to Snow, making it even tankier on the physical side. It can actually tank hits pretty well with Aurora Veil, maybe with Intimidate, and with the Snow up, boosting its physical defense stat. Terrestrialization is also nice because it doesn't have very good defensive typing, being weak to a lot of common types, and having a quadruple weakness to Steel. It's a Pokemon that I'm sure we'll be seeing more of in the future because of how strong the combination of Snow and Aurora Veil is, and although it's not like super good at the moment, I think that it's a Pokemon that you kind of always have to be wary of because it could always pop up. All that's left is the top 2. I went back and forth a little bit on these, but in the end decided that the Pokemon with the better results should hold the number 1 slot. Before we talk about that though, let's talk about what is inarguably the strongest Ice-type Pokemon, Calyrex Ice. If you don't already know, Calyrex Ice is kind of weird because it's kind of a fusion Pokemon. I mean, it is a fusion Pokemon between the Calyrex and then the Pokemon Glastrier, which I don't know why sticking a little guy on a horse makes it a brand new Pokemon, but I guess that's how it works now. Calyrex Ice is incredibly threatening. It's an Ice and Psychic type, which isn't amazing typing. In fact, I'd say it's actually pretty bad. Neither of those types are considered very good, but the typing isn't the reason to use Calyrex Ice. Calyrex has some of the most broken stats out of any Pokemon I've ever seen. It has remarkable attack, insane defense, and it's really slow. But being slow actually helps it because it actually wants to be used inside of Trick Room, which causes slow Pokemon to move before fast ones. Calyrex as a Psychic type gets access to the move Trick Room, although Trick Room isn't its most threatening move. That would be Glacial Lance, which is its signature move and is also very stupid. This move is an Ice type move that hits both opposing Pokemon for huge damage. For context, this move is as strong as Groudon's signature move, Precipice Blades, except Precipice Blades only has 85% accuracy, which makes it a big risk to use it. Calyrex Ice's Glacial Lance never misses, and it works really well with its ability, Chilling Neigh. Sorry, Chilling Neigh is Glastrier's ability. Calyrex has 2 abilities. Chilling Neigh gives it an attack boost whenever it takes a KO, which is pretty threatening when you have a move like Glacial Lance, and it also has the ability Unnerve, which prevents any berries from being eaten. This is a crazy combination of things, and is part of the reason why Calyrex Ice is one of the strongest restricted Pokemon ever. Oh yeah, it's worth noting that because Calyrex is a restricted Pokemon, it can only be used when other restricted Pokemon are legal, and prior to the current format, the only time it was legal was during Sword and Shield when it was first released, and it was good, but I would say like not an S tier restricted Pokemon. Like it was really good, but it wasn't like the best. It was mostly used with Palkia as like a Trick Room duo where both Palkia and Calyrex could work in Trick Room. They could both set Trick Room up, and then it was just kind of this team that aimed to overwhelm the opponent with Trick Room. And it was really solid. It got top 4 at the World Championships, but it wasn't like crazy dominant or anything. More recently though, Calyrex is looking a lot better in the current format. At the time I'm recording this, it most recently got first place at the North American International Championships, which is the only international where it was legal for, and it's looking like maybe the top restricted Pokemon going into the World Championships. That's partially because it got a pretty big buff. They added an item called the Clear Amulet, which prevents the holder stats from being lowered, which basically takes Calyrex from losing to Incineroar to beating it. Calyrex also, like all ice types, benefits a ton from terrestrialization because its defensive typing really isn't that good, but being able to turn into like a fire, a water, or a grass type is a pretty big deal because it not only gives you better defensive relationships, it also makes you, at least for fire or grass, immune to a really threatening status condition like burn or sleep. It's not technically immune to sleep, but it's immune to spore, which is the main form of sleep, so you get the point. And I think that if it wins the World Championships this year, I would feel comfortable putting it in the #1 slot. Calyrex is really incredible, and if you feel like it should be the #1 Pokemon on this list, that's totally valid. For me though, that slot goes to a different ice type Pokemon. The Pokemon that put Weavile out of business, Chien-Pao. Chien-Pao is basically souped up Weavile on Omega steroids. It has the same typing, Ice and Dark, but pretty much everything else about it is better. Chien-Pao is faster, stronger, and overall just better than Weavile. It has a better ability, a better move pool. It's just like incredible. I'm not saying this to rag on Weavile, but keep in mind Weavile was already on this list. Like it wasn't even at the very, very bottom, right? And so having a Pokemon that is just better in every way is pretty impressive. So what makes Chien-Pao so good? Well, a big part of it is its ability. The Sword of Ruin is completely unlike any other ability we'd seen prior to Scarlet and Violet. It reduces the defense stat of all other Pokemon in the field except for Chien-Pao. This might not sound that flashy, but keep in mind there's never been an ability that did this before. The only abilities that could even increase your partner's damage output were like Chargebugs and Stonejourners, both very gimmicky Pokemon. To have a legendary Pokemon with an ability that just passively amplifies your partner's damage if they're using physical moves is a really big deal. And that's part of the reason it basically unlocked a whole new type of strategy, using Pokemon like Terranormal Choice Band Dragonite, who was immune to Fake Out and Intimidate, and could use the powerful priority move Extreme Speed, which was boosted by both Choice Band and Terranormal and Sword of Ruin, to basically just run over opposing teams. And you didn't even have to use Chien-Pao as part of a combo. You could just use it on its own as well because all of its moves are physical. That's a big part of the reason why Chien-Pao won at least 5 regionals, an international level championship, and the World Championships, being only the second ice type Pokemon ever to win. And because Chien-Pao's ability is just basically like a flat damage multiplier, it pairs really well with even stronger Pokemon. When Urshifu was added in, we saw Choice Scarf Urshifu plus Chien-Pao be a really dangerous combo because Urshifu is hard enough to deal with on its own. When you're multiplying its damage even further, that's terrifying, especially because you also need to deal with the Chien-Pao. Like you can't just ignore it and focus on the Urshifu because it's really strong on its own too. More recently, we saw Chien-Pao paired with Zamazenta, where it could not only boost the damage of Body Press, bringing it up to just stupid amounts of damage, but Chien-Pao could also threaten the Ghost types that are immune to Body Press. I think part of what's so interesting about Chien-Pao is that it's actually a very inflexible Pokemon. What I mean by that is that it pretty much always runs the same moves and item. It's always Protect, Sucker Punch, Sacred Sword, and either Icicle Crash or Ice Spinner, and it's pretty much always holding the Focus Sash. While we have seen some experimentation, it's normally Ghost and sometimes Stellar. But despite the fact that it's so standardized, Chien-Pao is just so strong that it doesn't even really seem to care about it. Dark and Ice are both really good offensive types, and the fact that Chien-Pao gets Sacred Sword for coverage against opposing Dark or Steel types is a really big deal. With the Focus Sash, you can't get rid of it in a single hit, and with its high base speed, it's almost always contributing to battles. It's a clear standout as the best Treasure of Ruin, which is saying something because the other two are really good. Not you, Wo-Chen. Chien-Pao feels like they finally designed a good offensive ice type, and the only complaint I have about it is that it might be a little bit too good. Anyway, that's what I think the 10 best ice type Pokemon are. If you like this video, you should check out one of the other ones in the series. I personally think that the Fairy type one is really interesting because it's a type that hasn't been around for very long, and so it's really interesting just to see kind of how only modern competitive Pokemon really can even consider the Fairy type. It was fun for me to make, and if you want to cleanse your palate from a bad type with the best one in the game, you should check it out.